Thank you to UCLG, to UN Habitat, and Metropolis for hosting this session. I think it's incredibly important session. I think the fact that there are 238 participants on this call is suggestive of how pressing this matter really is. You know, both of you have already so well explained what's happening, the challenges, and also some of the opportunities. I'll just make a few highlights. I mean, as Amelia said, I've been working for the last many years trying to encourage governments to make a shift away from viewing housing as a commodity or as just an asset, and a shift toward understanding what it means to treat housing as a human right, as a home, as a social good. What's so interesting and terrifying right now is that we now know what happens when the right to housing isn't implemented. We know in this circumstance that it puts the entire world at risk of contracting a deadly disease. There it is. That's what happens when you don't treat housing as a human right. And that's pretty sobering, It's clear that globally there is a stay-at-home policy as a way to flatten the pandemic curve and to decrease the rate of infections. And along with that, as Maimouna already described, comes hand washing, social distancing, or physical distancing, I should say. And we know that, at least in my schematic, there are really two big groups of people or populations where this is hugely problematic, and a one-size-fits-all approach to health policy doesn't actually work. I've grouped them just conceptually for myself, for my own work, for practicality. People living in homelessness and informal settlements that are grossly inadequate, informal settlements where there's lacking water and sanitation in particular. I have that as one big group conceptually. And then the other group that I really want to focus on are those living in what I call housing precarity, where they are living paycheck to paycheck or month to month, barely able to stay in their homes at the best of times, let alone when faced with a worldwide economic recession or depression. So these are people whose homes are at risk. And I've come up with a series of recommendations. I'm developing what I'm calling guidance notes, and I'm trying to generate them day by day. So I had one yesterday, thank you, Amelia. I had one yesterday on informal settlements. Today I'm releasing one on homelessness. And then I'll go from there. But I've been very clear, there should be no evictions of anyone, anywhere, for any reason. And we can call that consistent with human rights, which it is, but we can also call that a logical extension of a stay-at-home policy. There, we don't have to even bring in human rights if that becomes too complicated. No evictions of anyone, anywhere, for any reason. With respect to people living in homelessness, they must be housed, period. They must be housed. And that doesn't mean in overcrowded shelters. It means in those places where this is possible. It means hotel rooms, motel rooms, converting big warehouses into individualized units. This can be done very, very quickly. We know this from the humanitarian world. It can be done, and it must be done, because that's what physical distancing and stay at home requires. With respect to informal settlements, I think that Maimouna already described what needs to happen there. Access to water and sanitation, disinfectants, soap, a constant flow of clean water, toilets, showers, proper sanitation. This is all obvious and obviously consistent with the right to housing. With respect to people who are struggling to pay the rent or pay their mortgage, there have to be relief programs. And these relief programs, which I'm seeing emerge in countries around the world, have to take into consideration that it's just simply not good enough to allow people to incur debt over time. So that at the end of the pandemic, you wake up, you look around, and you are completely flattened and your household is flattened with debt. That's not going to work. People need loan and mortgage forgiveness, rent forgiveness. That's the only way that people will come out of this pandemic, emerge healthy and healthy households, not just physically healthy, but also economically a little more healthy. I want to just touch on, and then I'm going to close, this issue of local governments needing national support. I always feel very allied with cities and local governments and regional governments, to be honest. And I am very concerned with what's happening between local and national levels. I live in a federal state. And in my country, the federal government has been very strong, very active, throwing a lot of money at this issue, in doing really amazing things. And yet still in these circumstances, local governments, municipalities are struggling. And part of that is there needs to be national leadership, but that national leadership has to support local governments to follow along. And that means money, information, resources, bodies on the ground helping. And I'm not seeing enough synergy between national level and local level. If I can do anything in that regard, maybe I need to issue a guidance in that regard. So I'm just going to keep my ears open, listen to you, and learn from you. And thank you so much for including me in this important discussion.